Uh, Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, participants of the C20 Summit Parallel Side Event, Vaccine Access and Global Health Working Groups. Thank you so much for having here. Warm greetings from Bali. I hope you enjoy Bali until now and after the C20 Summits also. Bali have a beautiful beach, have also the beautiful mountain and scenery. So I hope you enjoy this island of paradise. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, participants of the C20 Summit Parallel Side Event. I think it's good now. Okay. Thank you for to come to the side event. So this side event is aimed to discuss around the current challenging in the G20 initiative in the G20 process until now. So in the G20 initiatives, they have so many initiatives by Indonesian government. The first is around the financial intermediary fund and also the expanding manufacturing of vaccine diagnostic and therapeutics. And a lot of this discussion, we think that some problem with the engagement of the civil society. So this discussion will be around to discuss what's the current challenging around the G20 initiative. And also we have some colleague in here will become the next presidency in India for the next year. So we hope that this discussion also address some problem, what we face, what the current challenges to the next presidency. So we can have the better preparation to the next presidency, especially in the health issues, because India is also for Indonesian, India have the good manufacturing on vaccine, on diagnostic and therapeutics, and also have the good patent law. So we want to have the some lesson learned from India also, and for the preparation to the next presidency. So nice to meet you all in here for the side event. So I will move to this discussion to Lance Espacio from People's Vaccine Alliance, and also I give to thank you to Guillermina as the speakers, Arjun, Mas Aditya Wardana, and also Maza in here from Zoom platform. I hope this hybrid discussion have the good discussion for us for the next presidency. And thank you, everyone. Have a good discussion and enjoy the C20 summit. Thank you. I will move to Lance. Please, Lance, the floor is yours.
Salamat pagi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lance Espacio. I'm from the People's Vaccine Alliance in Asia. It's a pleasure to be moderating this conversation this morning. As our colleague Agung Prakoso from Indonesia Global Justice has said, the background for this conversation we'll be having this morning will be set in the context of our continued conversations in the C20 as a of the G20 forum. We've seen how throughout the pandemic, a variety of health and equity problems have arisen, and we, from the civil society organizations, have responded to such challenges and demanded governments to equitably respond to the issues that have arisen from the pandemic. Through the G20 forum, we've been monitoring as civil society organizations commitments of the G20 governments on 3 priority issues. First, on building global health systems resilience, then on harmonizing global healthcare protocol standards, and thirdly, on expanding global manufacturing and knowledge hubs for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. Across these three priority issues. We, as the Vaccine Access and Health Working Group, have been putting forward our demands and calls on the G20 governments. We've also seen how the G20 governments have established the Joint Finance and Health Task Force, which are working on what we've also talked about in this working group on the financing intermediary fund to be housed in the World Bank. We've also put forward our concerns with regard to the transparency and participation and involvement of civil society in decision making. Now that we're moving forward to the Heads of State Summit in November, as well as what our colleague had mentioned, the transition of G20 to the presidency of India, this conversation we're having is really to talk about our reflections so far and what we can do as civil society organizations to take our demands forward, again, in the context of the summit happening in November, and as well as the transition to the Indian presidency next year. Why is that important? Because we do recognize that the same issues, the inequality and the impacts, especially on people's lives and marginalized communities, still persist to this day. So we hope to continue this conversation in our engagement with the G20 Forum of Governments. So to help us share and just facilitate this conversation, we'll be having a panel conversation discussion among four of our colleagues. Just to name them here, online present is Maza Siyum from the People's Vaccine Alliance. She is the Global South convener of the, again, People's Vaccine Alliance Coalition. She's joining us online. She is based also in the United States in Boston at the moment. We also have, as part of this conversation, Aditya Wadana from the Indonesian AIDS Coalition, Guillermina Alanis from the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and Arjun Phillips from Oxfam India. We'll give our colleagues 10 minutes each to share their reflections as to the points raised by Agung and myself here, setting the context. And then after, we'll have an open conversation discussion among us for about 20 to 30 minutes until we end at 10 this morning, Bali time, that's GMT +8. To clarify, I've always been confused between Jakarta and Bali. Bali is in a different time zone, my friends and colleagues. So without further ado, I invite Maza Siyum, who is joining us online, to start off this conversation. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lance. And Lance, I'll count on you to, if I go over, to let me know, but I'll try and stick in the time allotted. Thank you very much for having me. A special thank you to the C20 Vaccine Access and Health Working Group, coordinated by Agung, Rachel, and Daniel. I really appreciate you consistently including the People's Vaccine Alliance in your deliberations. I am here on behalf of my policy and advocacy colleagues from the People's Vaccine Alliance who really wanted to join today, but for whom the time difference was somewhat unfriendly. The People's Vaccine Alliance Policy and Advocacy Group has been closely following the G20 agenda, working closely with Lance, and I was lucky enough to get some pointers from them for the discussion today. I know that many of you are familiar with the People's Vaccine Alliance, thanks to Lance, but for those who are not, we are a global coalition of over 100 organizations working to ensure that COVID-19 vaccines, tests, and treatments are available free of charge to everyone everywhere. We believe that access to healthcare is a human right and that the world's approach to health crises should prioritize people's lives, not profits. I think the founding story of the People's Vaccine Alliance is interesting here because it was founded on the basis of a previous pandemic, the HIV pandemic. There were people who had worked on that pandemic, experienced that era when treatments were too expensive for people in the global South, and wrote a letter to world leaders, health leaders in March 2020. So before the vaccines for COVID-19 had even been proven to be safe and effective, about 8 months before the first vaccine was administered out of clinical trials, that letter was written to warn people in the global health, decision-making arena to not make the same mistakes that we had made on HIV with COVID-19. Of course, unfortunately, that is what happened. Those same mistakes were made, and here we are, over 2 years later, fighting for access to medical tools that should be freely available to everyone everywhere. And I bring up that founding story just because, it shows why the deliberations that we're having today are so critical to ensure that this crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, with an estimated, over 15 million dead and many more lives impacted, as Lance has said, especially marginalized groups, that crisis must not go to waste. And we must not make, once again, the same mistakes as we face the next inevitable pandemic. So, a few things that are known to all of you in this room, I'm sure, although health is a human right, at least half of the world's population cannot obtain essential health services. An estimated 2 billion people today cannot access the medicines that they need. And of course, this inequity is rooted in structural, political, and economic imbalances, resulting in an uneven allocation of power and resources. This inequity is particularly evident at times of health crisis. So over the years and decades, several outbreaks, epidemics, and pandemics have raised alarms about global health inequalities, which are amplified by the fragility of national health systems, particularly in low and middle income countries, and the shortcomings, of course, of the global health architecture. And as we know, these inequalities continue to persist in the arena of COVID-19 right now. For example, the current data suggests that rich nations have already secured over half of the new generation of Omicron-specific mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. And we're seeing the same things with treatments. Data shows that 70% of Pfizer and Merck's at-home antiviral treatments for COVID-19 will go to high-income countries. So the People's Vaccine Alliance has analyzed the global failure in this response to the pandemic and has identified several issues which need to be addressed now and can be applied to future pandemics. They range from improving surveillance and speeding up sharing of virus samples to increasing financing and strengthening of health systems, enhancing R&D, diversifying manufacturing, and ensuring equal access to medical countermeasures. So by that, we mean the vaccines, diagnostics, and treatments. PVA has also developed a set of recommendations for actions in these areas and how they can be included in the pandemic treaty, which is currently being negotiated at the World Health Organization. We plan to publish these recommendations in the coming weeks, and this work has been led by the People's Vaccine Alliance's Policy and Advocacy Working Group, which consists of representatives from across the Alliance and around the world. So in our conversation today, I'd like to focus on how the G20 can promote innovation and access to medical technologies. First and foremost, the PVA believes that the public sector should take greater responsibility for setting R&D priorities, financing, and ensuring access to medical tools. Amongst other measures, governments must increase their funding for R&D of these medical tools and provide mechanisms for their joint financing, ensuring that the resulting products are really global public goods. To achieve this, governments, including, and probably most importantly, including the governments of the G20, should commit to attach conditions to public funding for R&D and purchasing agreements that require fair allocation of medical countermeasures, these tests, treatments, and vaccines globally according to public health criteria designed by WHO, affordable pricing with full transparency on R&D costs, meaningful tech transfer, including to what we refer to as developing countries, and finally, sharing of intellectual property rights through the medicines patent pool or WHO-led mechanisms like the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, CTAP. So on IP, governments should ensure that their national law includes TRIPS flexibilities, and that bilateral and plurilateral agreements are not a barrier to accessing life-saving technologies and products. Governments should be mandated not to enforce provisions in those agreements when they conflict with obligations under this treaty. So the current TRIPS agreement, and I know many of us worked on it, and were disappointed, worked on advocacy around the TRIPS waiver, and were disappointed with the decision that came through in June. But the TRIPS agreement, as problematic as it is, does guarantee some public health safeguards, but the imbalance of power in global trade and IP rights ownership makes it difficult for less powerful countries to apply these safeguards in practice. And governments must commit to not in any way obstruct or seek to dissuade other countries from making full use of the existing TRIPS flexibilities. Another crucial way in which the pandemic treaty should address the structural inequalities witnessed during the COVID-19 pandemic is by ensuring that countries in the global south have the rights and capacity to develop and produce the tools that they need. So this is something that both Lance and Agung have already mentioned today. The G20 summit should support building distributed R&D expertise and manufacturing capacities that will increase regional resilience and health autonomy. It should also encourage appropriate procurement practices to ensure the sustainability of these now newly established facilities by providing stable demand and coordinated demand. But of course, the availability of medical tools does not automatically mean that they can immediately reach communities and patients. Inadequate regulatory standards and procedures can slow down this access as well. It is therefore crucial to define clear and streamlined regulatory pathways that are based on collaboration between regulatory authorities. The role of the WHO pre-qualification scheme and collaborative registration procedures should be enhanced as well. Lastly, biomedical innovation is still shrouded. Sorry, Lance?
2 minutes left.
2 minutes left. Thank you. I'm almost done. So lastly, just to talk about the biomedical innovation and the secrecy that it's shrouded in across all aspects of the value chain. And this results in high product prices and inequitable access. So greater transparency is needed on, amongst other things, the cost of R&D, manufacturing and marketing, public and charitable funds and contributions, the price of products charged to all procurers in all countries. That's something that we really need more transparency on. IP information in all countries, both filed and granted, and clinical trials, including protocols and results, irrespective of the outcome of the trial, that information should be more easily available. So, and this is, before all of these points that I've mentioned is before we get to the issues of, the service delivery and other things that we can also, spend quite a bit of time talking about. But the ones that we've highlighted here are the ones that the People's Vaccine Alliance is advocating for, and that I'm hoping, these commitments will allow for a better system for the global governance of medical technologies and improve access to them for all. I hope that we can discuss, the possibility of taking these demands forward to the G20 next month. And I'm happy to discuss more and answer questions. And that's it for me from now. Thank you so much, Lance.
Yeah, thank you, Maza, for keeping time and making my work a bit easier this time. Yes, so thank you, Maza. She's from, again, the People's Vaccine Alliance global team. I won't go summarize the points so as to save us time. Maybe I'll do that a bit later. Next on our panel is Aditya Wardana from the Indonesia AIDS Coalition. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Les. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Aditya Wardana. Actually, I'm preparing some sort of slide. This is not really a new slide. Actually, I already presenting this during the Intellectual Property Summit in the Turkey 2 months ago. I've been asking to present about maximizing TRIPS flexibility in national patent law. My name is Aditya Wardana. I'm the executive director of the Indonesia AIDS Coalition. We are one of the principal recipients of the Global Fund grant in Indonesia. Next slide, please. So this is a benefit of patent law reform in improving access, learning from Indonesian experience. The patent law reform is a bottom-up approach that could be a complementary to the trade waiver movement. That we know that the trade waiver movement is still not meet our expectation because of the pressure of the other country. So we suggest that we need to find a way or new strategy on a more localized and bottom-up approach this through the strengthening the patent law reform in each of the country. That can be setting up a new standard of patent law that can be a pro to the people. And from our experience in Indonesia, when we advocating for the patent law reform, it's not only benefiting one or a specific disease only, but it could be also benefiting a broader health need and response. And the other thing that actually I want to raise up during this G20 is better collaboration between South-to-South country is needed to share experience and knowledge. Next slide, please. Learning from the Indonesia, this is some of the trade flexibility that actually had been succeed to be accommodated in our patent law. We have a compulsory license which allows states to authorize the exploitation of patent, and we also have a government use. We have a parallel import. Actually, these three of the trade flexibility now is already incorporated in our patent law. Next slide. This is the history of the patent law in Indonesia. If I know, Indonesia already have the patent law since 1940. And then most significant that we work together with the Indonesia Global Justice is the advocacy on 2016. This is a very progressive patent law in Indonesia currently that we have. Even though the last in 2020, we know that the omnibus law is removed the mandatory local working. It is something that we thought that setback from us. But again, the government trying to enforce TKDN, local content of the pharmaceutical product, including now prohibiting 79 health products to be imported to the Indonesia. And in 2022, there is a plan to make an amendment to Indonesia patent law. So this is actually one of opportunity for us to ensure that Indonesia patent law is more progressive. Next slide. This is the revision that we worked on in 2016 with Indonesian Global Justice that already accommodated in our patent law, improvement the provision of patent for government use, exception for criminal and civil suit for parallel import and bolar provision, and invention in the form. This is how we try to avoid the second medical use. Very important because sometimes it would one of the 3+ that being used by the pharmaceutical company, the second medical use. And we also arrange the compulsory license for export and import arrangement, increase opportunity for the optimization of national industry, including granting compulsory licensing. So after we work in 2016, what is the impact? What the impact? Next slide, please. This is the impact. We do have some of the president decree on the government use. In 2014, 2016, 2012, until 2020. From 10 of the medicine that actually now we have the government use license. Government use license is one kind of like compulsory licensing. Now, if we can see, the price is dropped. For instance, the number 8, tenofovir, lamivudine, efavirenz. This is the one of the backbone for the HIV and AIDS medicine in Indonesia, which now is consumed by around 60,000 people. 60,000 people. Before we work on this government use licensing, the price of tenofovir, lamivudine, efavirenz is 42 US dollar per bottle. Now in 5 year, it lower until 6.7. It's already nearing the international price for the similar medicine. Because now the international price for the tenofovir, lamivudine, efavirenz is around $5. Yeah. So this is actually how we can demonstrate the impact of the government use license for a broader health program. And then how about the domestic manufacture? Most of the medicine that being regulated on our government use license now can be produced locally, from lamivudine, nevirapine, until the COVID medicine, like remdesivir and favipiravir. It can be produced locally in Indonesia. So that is why during the Intellectual Property Summit in Turkey, and now, and again tomorrow in India presidency, we want to raise up this message. The patent reform, the local patent reform, the state patent reform is quite important, because this can improve access to life-saving medicine and enable local production. Well, we know there is other mechanism like voluntary licensing, but it is only could improve access to life-saving medicine, and it's not enabling the local production. But through the patent law reform, besides we can improve access to life-saving medicine, we can also enable local production. My last slide, please. So this is the taking point that we want to convey to the India presidency to work together. Yeah. How about how we breaking the barriers? The first one is to strengthen the comprehension and advocacy skill of the community who advocate for access to medicine are key success, because most of the government use license in Indonesia is happen because the community are advocating it. It is quite important. And then the second that we've been discussed with the Indonesian Global Justice, the importance to have a patent law reform network. This is some sort of South-to-South collaboration to reform a country patent law. Because we see that some of the country actually already have a good and progressive patent law. For instance, like South Africa, India, Brazil. If we can establish a patent law reform network who can communicate regularly, actually it can be benefiting not for only those countries, but also for the region and for the whole globally. And the last thing, related to developing patent law reform database, because we know that, and related to the patent law, sometimes the gap of knowledge of the capacity between each country is different. So that's why it's very important we develop a learning hub to be accessible for activists on doing the patent law advocacy. So this is actually the three message that we want to convey beyond this Indonesian presidency. If we can work on this, we believe that it would be complement from the three paper movement, but also we need a bottom-up approach. So thank you. That is my short presentation. I give back to Les. Thank you, Les.
Thank you very much, Mas Aditya, and also again for keeping time within 10 minutes. Thank you very much. All right, so next up is our colleague from Latin America, Guillermina Alanis from the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Bienvenida sa Indonesia.
Good morning to everyone. Good evening, good afternoons. Thank you for joining us in this side event. First of all, I want to thank the Vaccine Access and Global Health Working Group for this invitation. I also want to thank the C20 Secretariat and all the committees that I've been working with this year. I'm from AIDS Healthcare Foundation. I'm Director of Global Advocacy and Policy, and I've been participating in the health working groups of the last 4 C20s. Some of the issues that we've been discussing are the same. Some became new after COVID. And when I started thinking about the side event and what we were going to discuss, I couldn't help thinking that we can't really discuss anything if we don't discuss COVID-19 pandemic crisis, especially because we hear all the time people saying the lessons we learned, but as civil society and from AHF, we would like those lessons to be applied and to be part of the future preparedness, prevention, and response to other pandemics. Since Spanish is my first language and I get very nervous when I have to do formal presentations, I will read part of my intervention so that we can have a discussion in a more easy way. So I apologize for that, but I can't help it. So when we faced COVID-19 pandemic crisis, the world showed that we weren't prepared. Countries weren't prepared. International and multilateral organizations and institutions were not prepared. No one was prepared. And we all suffered the consequences, especially the more vulnerable people. We saw that some countries were helpless and others had enough for their own citizens and more. We saw how countries asked for trip weavers to be able to produce vaccines regionally and in country to make vaccines accessible to all, but got no positive response from those who had to make the decisions. Some countries depended on the solidarity and donations of others instead of being able to grow, develop, and resolve their own problems. I remember a phrase that I heard when I was part of the H20 summit a month ago by Baroness Patricia Scotland. She's the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Nations, and she said, "We were and are all in the same storm, but not all in the same boats." And I could not forget that phrase because it perfectly reflects what we went through and how we went through COVID-19 pandemic crisis according to the country we lived in or our nationalities. We also learned the importance of civil society and community-based organizations work. We also learn how health and community workers are essential for any response that we might have. Two of the main lessons that we learned from COVID-19 pandemics and that we've been asking from AHF since 2020, and we will keep asking for them, is that no country is safe until all countries are safe. That means that every human must have access to vaccines and medical products timely, with equity, transparency, and cooperations between all countries and stakeholders around the world. We worked on this issue since 2020 on many international platforms, including C20s. And from AHF, we outlined specific actions to put the world on the best course to respond to current and future health crises, because we will have more pandemics and more crises. COVID-19 showed the world's vulnerability to infectious disease outbreaks and was a threat to global stability, health, and development. The pandemic also greatly affected countries' economies, plunging billions of people into poverty. Amid a profound global crisis that calls for unity, the leadership, the world was divided more than ever. Each C20 is an opportunity for the leaders of the 20th largest economies to finally recognize that business as usual concerning global health is ineffective and must be radically reformed if we are to be protected against future pandemics. Our specific asks since 2020 to G20 leaders were and are the same: to support patent weavers on vaccines and technology transfers to countries that have the production capacity to increase vaccine and medical product production. In a life and death struggle, global health must come before profits of pharmaceutical companies. People's lives are always before money and profits. We ask them to increase access to genomic sequencing technology so that all countries can effectively monitor the emergence and spread of new and existing diseases. Timely virological surveillance is essential to preventing the emergence of new deadly variants and our ability to adapt vaccines and responses. To commit to global cooperation as the only way to address pandemics. No country is safe until all countries are protected. To mandate the sharing of global public health related information and data. 100% transparency is essential. To expand the mandate of the global fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, to establish it as a funding mechanism for current and future pandemic response efforts. As an international financial channel with a proven track record of delivering global public health program, the Global Fund is the perfect institution to tackle emergent health emergencies. To work on a new global public health convention as a framework for restructuring the global health governance systems so that the world is fully prepared with a plan, financing, and other resources to respond to future outbreaks and pandemics. Considering the ongoing crisis, our proposal calls for the entire global public health architecture to be redesigned. And this transformation, we believe, must be guided by three fundamental principles: transparency, accountability, and cooperation. Our proposed principles related to these transformations are related to improving the current system of global public health security by authority. An effective global health convention requires a global vision and should provide an agency or agencies the necessary authority to monitor, share data, and coordinate activities across countries. An effective convention requires countries to share some degree of authority so that the governing agency or agencies can effectively coordinate activities whenever and wherever they are needed. Such an agreement must also emphasize prevention, including the primary prevention of infectious diseases outbreaks. Responsiveness. The global public health system and its governing agency or agencies should possess the capability to flexibly and rapidly respond to, instill protections for, formulate interventions against, and mobilize and deploy resources for a range of possible public health security threats and scenarios, such as infectious diseases, outbreaks, and pandemics. Expertise. In a global public health system, one body should exist as the singular authority source for information, data, and technical assistance. This agency should possess appropriate technical expertise and must be able to communicate a clear and compelling message to the world. Evaluation. The capacity of objectively evaluating countries on their progress in achieving requirements and of providing or coordinated remediations for identified deficiencies should be built into a governing framework for a global public health system. An effective framework must emphasize external monitoring for each country's progress in meeting some of the public health requirements. Enforcement. Reform must equip a governing body or bodies with appropriate enforcement mechanisms. This can include substantial incentives for countries to cooperate or sanctions for non-compliance, or maybe both. Autonomy. The governing body or bodies should be autonomous, having freedom of self-governance and decision-making processes, resistance to undue political pressures. Financing. Since I'm not going to have time, I will go into financing after the discussion. And I do want to highlight representation. A government structure for a global security system must be representative of all countries and other relevant non-state stakeholders. The governing framework must possess a high degree of transparency and accountability. It should also include other relevant stakeholders from civil society, the public health sector, the private sector, academia, and amongst others. It should be multi-sectorality. A formal pandemic prevention preparedness and response systems, including governing bodies, must involve multiple sectors at all levels of governments and actions. In addition to the national governments, participating stakeholders must include the private sector, philanthropy organizations, global non-governmental organizations, local government, academia, communities, or governmental organizations operating on the field. We ask for commitment for a global health security convention to be effective. All relevant parties participating in the system must understand the threat posed by pandemic infectious diseases, accept the gravity of this threat, acknowledge their own responsibility in contributing to effective prevention, preparedness, and response, and show a commitment to these efforts. The Global Public Health Convention should serve as a basis for a responsive and equitable global health architecture capable of rapidly delivering life-saving results during outbreaks and international health emergencies. It must be infused with a robust mandate to overcome problems such as the vaccine hoarding and the inequities in accessing vaccines and medicines, and the reluctance of some countries to share epidemiological data in a transparent, timely, and credible manner for the benefit of health security in all nations. Some of our asks and our principles have had some response, but as civil society, we will keep advocating for all of them because we think they're essential for global health. We share one interconnected world and one fate. Whether individual nations and their leaders choose to forgo self-interest to save humanity is a choice they must make today. So we call on the G20 to make the right thing. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Guillermina. Thank you very much for your thoughts and reflections so far. And then finally, last on the panel, also to remind everyone, we'll have, I think if we keep time, a good 30 minutes to have a conversation right after this series of talks. I invite to the floor Arjun Phillips from Oxfam India. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. There was a confusion that took place. I thought that this session would be in the evening. Didn't realize it was in the morning, and Agung just came up and asked me that I have to be present over here. So sorry for being shabbily dressed. Yes, so I'm Arjun Phillips from Oxfam India. I'm primarily looking at the advocacy around international financial institutions, that is consisting of World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, Asian Infrastructure Bank, and New Development Bank. And apart from that, I'm the International Advisory Committee member of the C20 also. It's I think I've been participating since Argentina in the C20, the C20 Argentina. So this is, I think, the 5th or 6th C20 that I've been here. And because as part of Oxfam India, we have been trying to mobilize and galvanize civil society organizations and supporting them, especially those working around health. So I would be presenting something of a summary of what we can expect in India around these issues. So primarily what we see in India is that once the handover comes to from Indonesia, the 3 burning questions that will be addressed by the Indian presidency, especially from the civil society, would be inclusion, access to medical health care, and of course, equity. These 3, I think, would be the primary points around which we will be building our advocacy under the C20 banner. So what we are going to address right now, I think, is going to be very important for us in next year. I think that it's going to be around addressing the immediate fallout of the pandemic. And I say this because there was a data point that came out that by September 29th, the government actually of India said that about 28.6% of the eligible population of 796 million will be accessing booster doses. So we are still calling upon the government of India to invest in the delivery of COVID vaccine boosters, which needs to be done at the free of cost. And of course, apart from this, I think what another point that should be stressed is to continue the support initiated under the COVID emergency response and system preparedness that has been provided by the government. And we say this because a large population has faced a huge crisis when it came to the second wave. I think India was deeply, deeply affected by the COVID pandemic during the second wave. And not only that, we have also seen a recurring challenge with health workers who have faced continuous problems, because as frontline workers, they were provided some kind of safety. They were exonerated by the government, but we see that it still continues that they have yet to receive compensation and monthly salaries for the work that they have done during the pandemic. Apart from this, we are also going to stress on the community health structures that are in India, especially what we call the health and wellness structures, health and wellness centers. And we are asking them to ensure that these are fully equipped in terms of infrastructure, human resources, and facilities, including medicines and diagnostics, in line with the IPHS standards. We are also going to focus on our accredited social health workers. These are women workers who have, who are partaking in community health activities. They have been recognized by the United Nations as a very, very potent force in delivery of health access, especially functioning in the roles of midwives. However, what we see in India is that these workers, which we abbreviate to called ASHAs, that comes out to be ASHAs, ASHA workers have faced continuous problems in terms of their salaries, their compensation, and that's what one stress is going to be in our C20. And I hope that the health working groups, within the Indian C20 banner, talk to the unions, and engage with them and take up their concerns. Thirdly, I think what basically is one of the most biggest challenges that India faces is the inequality, the horizontal and vertical inequalities that has been consistently stymieing and stumbling the access to healthcare. And here I want to make an emphasis on the continued marginalization and inequality faced by our certain groups, communities, vulnerable populations that are categorized as scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. So India historically, I think I don't need to make a point over here, but historically, India has it's stratified under different forms of society. So the lowest rungs of the society are called Dalits and the Adivasis, which means that they're out of the accepted caste forms. And these scheduled castes and Dalits and tribals, they have faced a huge problems in accessibility of healthcare services. So we are also calling for a focus on women, Muslims, and persons with disability, because as data points out, we see that there is a difference. There's a huge difference that comes out in stunted children and the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe households, and those households which are belonging to the general category, that is the upper caste. 12.6 and 3.6 respectively. 1 in every 2 children in India are anemic, with 3 out of 5 children belonging to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes households. So that is the difference we are talking about, and that is what we are going to focus. And mind you, we do have a lot of civil society groups which are working towards bringing Dalits and Adivasis to the mainframe, and that is where we would be engaging with them and strengthening their voice. Lastly, I think what would be one of the primary areas is to refrain from supporting private initiatives, especially the public-private partnerships that have emerged in healthcare systems. We are also going to ask for the strengthening of certain legislations in the Indian health context, the Clinical Establishment Acts and the Patients' Rights Charter, which are legislations that have been focusing on enhancing and strengthening the voice of patients in the healthcare system. Here we are also going to focus that third-party monitoring tools be available for PPP projects, because PPPs in health have they bring in a kind of an inequality in accessibility of medical health care, and they do bring in some kind of there is a huge out of expenditure that people face when they go to the PPPs. So these are the primary areas that we are going to focus upon. Apart from that, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what shape the financial intermediary fund takes place, especially when India's also has its the country partnership strategy and framework, that is the 5-year plan for the World Bank and ADB for their scheme of interventions in the particular country is going to be renewed. And mind you, most of the interventions that come from the health schemes and the policies that are adopted by the Indian government have been largely influenced by the World Bank and the ADB, their policies, their technical advisories. So in that way, we are also trying to influence those agendas that actually resonate with these concerns: inequality, ensuring accessibility, focus on Dalit and Madivasis, and of course, at the last, that is refraining from increased privatization. So I think on that note, I finish my talk. I'll be happy to take any questions afterwards. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Arjun. And I think I'd like to request our panelists. That was all right. Yeah, it was caught there. Okay. It's a bit shaken by that. Yeah, may I invite our panelists to please maybe go to the front of the stage. I don't know who can help us with the chairs and so forth. Thank you so much. So then you can see one another as we're having a conversation. Mazasium, I hope, is still online, joining us via Zoom. So just to summarize, as you're thinking of your questions or inputs to our conversation this morning, we have 30 minutes for this part until 10 a.m. So we have a good amount of time. I think our panelists discussed well first the context of, again, our conversation, the background as to which we're having, conversations about these concepts about health equity, vaccine access, and so forth. We've seen, as Maza and other colleagues have mentioned, the severe and impacts on people's lives, millions of preventable deaths during the pandemic that were caused really by vaccine nationalism, hoarding of these tools, where high-income countries had first access to the tools and prevented us from what they're calling developing countries to have access to these life-saving tools. We've seen a highly imbalanced global response to the pandemic. And so secondly, I think our panelists have also shared some lessons learned from the issues that we faced during the pandemic, right? We as civil society organizations who have been working on many global health issues, on HIV/AIDS, on tuberculosis, and many other diseases, are saying and standing here now and saying that never again should we go through the same mistakes that the global community has committed, especially in the past. We've also heard that for as long as no country is safe from this disease, then not all countries are safe from the pandemic. And therefore, as civil society organizations, we have a role to hold our governments accountable. We've seen or we've also learned from the pandemic that the experience of peoples during the pandemic is intersectional with the many issues that we've been facing throughout the world. We've seen how excluded groups, marginalized communities, especially in highly stratified societies, are differentially impacted by the issues that we face. So thirdly, our colleagues have also shared some insights as to the calls and demands, especially on the G20. I think very broadly, we're calling really for a redesign or a reimagining of global mechanisms that is more responsive to the needs of peoples and communities we are working with or are working for, right? Calling for better transparency, solidarity, accountability, cooperation that put people at the heart and center of global health systems. More concretely, we're also looking at a variety of issues on financing for future pandemic preparedness and response, on eliminating trade and IP barriers through the WTO, the inclusion of communities and civil society in decision-making, specific reforms to governance, strengthening local healthcare systems, not just in terms of infrastructure, but also of social and human resources, right? Of supporting our healthcare workers is something that is also important. Nationally, we've also heard colleagues discuss in India and in Indonesia calls on governments in relation to IP-related reforms on medical technologies, again, on strengthening local healthcare systems, recognizing the right to health as a human right. We've also seen in part some recommendations on civil society involvement for us. No, I think Mas Aditya had put a good point on in terms of promoting South-South cooperation among civil society organizations and even governments, and having this just sharing of good practices, I think, is also an important concrete recommendation that we can take forward. Why is all of these important? Because again, given the Indonesian experience, I think that we've seen really the concrete impact of that. No? For example, with the IP reforms in, as our colleague had mentioned, in Indonesia, that resulted to real impact on the ground, right? Lower prices, more local production, and therefore improved access to life-saving medicines. We've seen that work, as our colleague had mentioned, and so I feel like that is an inspiring example of really the hope of many of the demands that we have been putting forward in the G20 forum. So that's my hopefully short synthesis of what our panelists have shared. Now I open the conversation to the audience, or not really audience, but of course our friends and colleagues here in the room. Also, I think we also have colleagues online. So just to be how do you say, also wary of that, or like conscious of that, that they can also put forward their questions there. I saw a hand raised. Yes, please. I don't know if you have another mic that we can also. So we have one here. Oh no, we just have one. All right, no worries.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, panelists. A very interesting discussion. How many questions? I have two questions actually, yeah. Thank you. I'm Fadil, I'm from IQVIA Solutions, Indonesia. My first question is to Mr. Aditya. So you were mentioned about the local content requirement from the Indonesia National Procurement System. My question is the concern with the local requirement, local content requirement is kind of limiting the product, right, to be purchased by the national budget. It's kind of prevent a healthy competition in the market, right? Which eventually limiting the sources availability and impacting product security. What would be your suggestion for the Indonesia government to improve in this area? Second question is to Mr. Arjun. So I'm interested with the focus of public-private partnership that you mentioned. I heard it seems like a financial support, but maybe if you could please provide more details about it. How does it work? What is the public contribution or the private contribution? So for us to get more lesson learned about how it works in India in your project. And what would be the ideal PPP program that you envision to be more ideal? Thank you.
Can I answer? Yeah. Thank you for the question. So yes, basically related to the local production requirement is bring like a pro-cons situation that need to be really analyzed here. So that's why it's very important for Indonesia or other country who want to do this kind of policy is analyzing it very well and then establishing a roadmap actually. So we can know in how high dependency of the country from the foreign product or the import product and how the capacity itself. So actually, but what we learned from the HIV and AIDS, again, because my organization is working on the HIV and AIDS during this pandemic situation, to have a huge reliance, huge dependency to the import product, actually in 2021 is bring a disaster for Indonesia, because we usually get the ARV from India at the time, imported from India. At that time, we already have a contract with pharmaceutical in India. But again, since the pandemic situation, it is really difficult for us to transporting to Jakarta. So that's why in most of the city in Indonesia, we're facing stock out. So that's why it is from our experience, it's really important to have a local production for the essential medicine. Even though we also need to very carefully on doing this kind of policy and analyzing it and how the impact. And the other thing is, at that time we try to enforce this local production for ARV medicine. We thought that there's only one or two pharmaceutical company that could be only interested to this to producing the product. But no, because in 2018 we conducted a pharmaceutical company meeting, and then we invite them to the meeting, and we say that we want a more localized ARV production. And now we have around 8 until 9 pharmaceutical company who competing each other. So that's why that is something that actually bring the price down. So what we are worried that by enacting this kind of local production could stopping the competition is not happen, because market is the market and the producer is the producer. When they see there is a margin on it, they're willing to invest on it. And the last thing that is quite important is how the government investing to the government investing to the local production facility itself, and also not less is to the human resources, because sometimes to produce this kind of high-tech medicine or the high-tech health product, it needs a technology transfer for sure. So that's why there is what we saw is we need some incentive to the local pharmaceutical company so they can produce as well. At this time, we also assisting one of the condom production, how they can get the PQ qualification, and then how the government could willing to put it the investment to strengthen the local production. Because in the near future, we also want that we can also produce locally the condom that meet with the international standard, not only imported this very simple health technology actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. Adio. So one thing we have to understand is that we are trying to stop the march of privatization into healthcare, because we actually think it's an essential service. We do not want privatization to enter healthcare. We've seen disastrous effects of it. And of course, the data is very, very sporadic. It's not collected in one place where we can actually make a case that privatization is not good. But still there are evidence, there's good amount of evidence to suggest that PPPs and any form of privatization in healthcare will actually lead to an exasperation of existing inequalities. So there's no ideal PPPs as as we can say, because of course PPPs do have a problem with them, and that's why we are asking the government, when the G20 comes to India, we specifically make that demand that concrete measures should be taken, that privatization should be halted at all costs. Of course, this is a very, very ambitious demand. The government will not accept to it. And of course, they have many treaties with many private players, and they are interested in privatization. But at the best, we can at least show them that this is the evidence that is there. And we are engaged in that. We're trying to collect that evidence to make our advocacy call very, very strong and concrete. So I think that is more essential to understand the whole complexity of PPPs. Of course, some people do suggest that it has a component of public sector participation, but that is an argument which is, I think, it doesn't hold water. So because totally this privatization that is taking place in healthcare industry, and India has really been an example where private players have actually demonstrated that they lack the morality, the transparency and accountability to hold to the standards that have been there. So in India, it's a very different story. And that's why many health activists and many of the health groups over there are against privatization.
Thank you, Arjun. I'm Deepak Dhungel. I'm representing AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and I'm based in Nepal. I'm working there as an advocacy and marketing manager. And the access issue that you highlighted with regard to Dalit, disabled, and women and girls, this is what happening, especially in South Asia. And I have also witnessed this. And since we are AIDS Healthcare Foundation is heavily engaged in promoting girls, I would like to know more about the approaches that you followed during recent pandemic, how we supported government to access health services better. This is what I wanted to learn from you. Thank you. And if I miss anything, maybe Gie, she is leading our Girl Child Initiative and she will be adding more. Thank you.
So you specifically wanted to know about the girls, the government in. Yes, so that's what we are actually thinking of, that we need an equality framework also that the government should adopt, in which we can see what kind of access should be included for all these communities, especially which are endemic to the South Asian countries. So it is not only India where Dalits and Adivasis reside. We see it in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal has a large population, even Bangladesh to that matter extent. It extends to the, I think, Pacific Islands also, where Indians are in diaspora over there to a certain extent, not at that level. So we're trying to see what kind of an equality framework they can bring out and what kind of accessibility frameworks they can actually include with that. Of course, this is something, again, it's going to take time, it's going to take effort also, but we could reason out with them. They do have some provisions. We have a the government is having, or the government of India actually has a large-scale insurance program, for example. It actually covers a large population of Dalit and Adivasi communities who are registered there. But still there are loopholes. There are some efforts that need to be put over there. So that is one way on which we can actually make those experiences learned. We are also trying to push the government to do a caste census, which has not happened in the last decade. The last caste census that took place was in the last decade. So that way we do not know the actual population of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in India. So that is a problem we face. And I think when this movement, when G20 comes to India, this will be a very good opportunity for us, like AIDS Healthcare Foundation and other grassroots organizations, to continue to lead the advocacy on this.
Yes, I would like to add a little bit to that. I'm based in Argentina. I'm Argentinian, but since I'm part of the global team, during COVID pandemic, I had the chance to share with my colleagues from 45 countries around the world. So I could really, I lived my own experience in Argentina, but I could also learn and hear from 45 other countries how they were doing. And when we talk about health, I want to share with people vaccines that health is a human right. And that's where we should start. Because if it's a human right, it's for everyone and it's timely and it's not one's first and others. And each country have their own cultural differences, like India was saying. In other countries, for example, in Latin America, one of the biggest problems was rural areas and indigenous populations. Very difficult to access health in general, imagine during COVID. So that's where we had to work with government, not only to help them reach to those people, get healthcare to those people, not only COVID-19 vaccines that in Argentina we didn't have at first, but with all the healthcare they needed. And when we started doing that, it's not only about medical products or medicines or doctors, it's also about the culture. How do we raise awareness? How do we share and teach them? How do we educate? We have to do it in their language according to their culture. So those are also big lessons that must be applied to any health response that we think about in the future. So that was my personal experience. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Then I'll ask each panelist to, share their final thoughts, so we can conclude also this discussion. Just wait a moment. I don't know if there are any people online who would like to maybe provide comments or questions, just to give them space. Yes, Maza. Then we'll go ahead to someone here in person. Yes, Maza, please.
Thanks, Lance. I'm just going to take us back briefly to the previous question, and I just wanted to support the final comment that Arjun was making in terms of the concerns about, privatization and this need to kind of push for competition and profits. There is right now what we're seeing, the irony of now suddenly people trying to roll out monkeypox vaccines, for example, because the value on life in the global north is seen as more important. Monkeypox has been endemic in Africa for many years, and there were people dying of monkeypox in Africa, but there seemed to be no hurry to develop vaccines, or to really push, to increase the market for vaccines, because people didn't see that as being a profitable way to make money. And now with people being affected in the global north, suddenly there is an interest. And that's another reason why I think we should worry about this kind of, privatization, looking for profits and having private companies decide which lives matters and which lives don't. So just to support what Arjun was saying in terms of the concerns with, this private focus, and also Guillermina from Argentina as well, another argument for why this should be a global public good rather than thinking about competition and private measures. So I just wanted to support that. Thank you, Lance.
All right, thanks, Maza. We'll take another in person, please. Sorry, I forgot. I have the mic.
Thank you, colleagues, for very thoughtful reflections and strong recommendations. I recall our meeting in last August in Jakarta. At the time, Arjun and several colleagues here also present online and offline. By the way, I'm Arsinta from Yakum, National NGO working for public health and advocating for the mental health issue, and also member of Vaccine Access and Global Health Working Group. My questions to all of you, if you remember at that time, I got a feeling that it's very, very valid a point that colleagues from Argentina mentioned, that actually CSO is helping and contributing to our government efforts to prevent privatizations and all the things that you recommended to all of us. My question to you all, I got the feeling that at that time, government doesn't see the importance of CSO's work. And we are challenged at that time to show that our recommendations are based on the accurate data. And also we as CSO are also showing the innovations of our calling. And my question to all of you is, what is one thing that we have to call to our government to value our contributions, and also to what is the strategies to ensure that government will take us seriously? Thank you.
Maybe I can start. Okay, I think I totally agree with you. During the biggest crisis, CSOs and community-based organizations, as well as health workers, but also community workers, were very important to roll out responses. Many times, or in many places, governments do not recognize the work or the value of CSOs, and that's why, from our side, we must advocate to be sitting at every decision-making table with full rights, with voice and with vote. And that is a way that we're going to be able to share with the government, because this is not about being against anyone. It's about working together. It's about also what I said before, and also what the G20 this year is, together stronger. So that together means government, means CSOs, means community-based, means health workers, means community workers, and the same level of discussions. Then we have different responsibilities, and that's also true. And the government has to be responsible for what they must do. But I think the way to do it is that advocating and being present and participating in each step of the way, as we saw with FIF. FIF started, it was approved, we celebrated, no civil society was part of it. We advocated a lot and we got a consultation. Out of the consultations, we have 2 initial board members to be able to participate. We are going for more, and we will be there until we get it. Thank you.
Since we only have like 6 minutes left in this session, I'll just ask again to include in this final remarks, maybe some of your reflections also, apart from reflections on civil society's role in all of these conversations. Also, like moving to India, I think concretely for us here in this working group, that's something that's at the back of our minds, right? I mean, we've been working with Indonesia this year. We're transitioning to India next year. So maybe you can also, as we conclude this session, include your reflections on that, what we should consider, as we move forward to the Indian presidency next year. So Arjun?
Yes. Well, again, I would mention that once it comes to India, it will be a very, very opportune moment for all the southern countries to, come together and advocate for a very effective right to health, what Philomena was actually mentioning about. Because successively, then it will go to Brazil, then South Africa, and this will be a continuous process. So Indonesia has already set the ball rolling. It's only for us Indians to actually take it forward in a more effective manner. And of course, I can assure you from my side that whatever recommendations, of course, what I've spoken over here is totally an Indian context on the issues and challenges homegrown to India. But whenever we are drafting this policy pack, we will always keep in mind that these are issues and concerns that are emanating from the global south. And this should always remain the common strand between all the global southern countries, whether it's been Brazil, whether it's South Africa, whether it's India, or any other country for that matter of man. So I think this is going to be a very important time for us. We've already, the mandate has already been prepared by Indonesia. Now it's time for us to actually get it into action. And let's hope that this comes to a very, very concrete outcome during the 2025 presidency of South Africa.
Well, for my final remarks, I want to say some words like human rights, like equity, like transparency, like accountability, cooperations. But I also want to say that if we work together and we unite, we will probably achieve much more. That the C20 is a great opportunity to do that. And for the India future presidency, I am very glad that it's from the global south. And I am also very glad and expectant to support any issues you might have. But also, please, let's keep advocating for trip weavers. India was one of the presenters with South Africa, and that was an honor for us. It was very, very important for other countries that the governments were not or are not strong enough to be leading on that. And let's not give up and work together, and we'll get places. Thank you.
I have no comment. Yes, I have no addition.
All right, and then finally, Maza, please.
Thank you so much. I just, in terms of the transition to India, really just want to echo Guillermina and highlight, how great it is that one of the countries that initiated the TRIPS waiver now coming up. We just passed, actually, the day before yesterday was the anniversary of the TRIPS waiver application going in, and here we are still waiting, to complete that process and get access to tests and treatment in the TRIPS waiver. So And also just wanted to highlight, what I said earlier, that we must not let this crisis go to waste. With the HIV pandemic, we saw that finally it was shame that pushed the pharmaceutical companies to finally do the right thing. And as civil society, we must keep fighting. If we need to shame them, we'll shame them. If we need to always be fighting to be at the tables, we must continue to fight to be at the tables. But, with the amount of people who have died and the amount of money that pharmaceutical companies have made, one of the estimates was $1,000 per second that are being made on these products while people are dying. So yes, I would just, thank everybody for all the work. The C20 is such an important forum. I really appreciate the invitation and look forward to keeping up the work with you. Thank you very much.
All right, and with that, we have a minute left, and I think we have managed this well and on time. Thank you very much to our panelists and all those present. Let's continue the conversation here for people in person. We have a few days left here in Bali. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.